cup of coffee, sit back and listen to Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life features stories to inspire and motivate you. Live your best life now. Listen, learn, think, and decide. Change your attitude, change your life. Visit cyacyl.com.
Welcome to Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. I'm Joan Herman. Thanks for tuning in. In our attempt to create and maintain happy relationships, often we end up repeating the same old patterns that get in the way of achieving our goal. Today's guest, Dr. Marsha Lucas, is here to help us get rid of these relationship habits and teach us how to improve our communication, handle fear, and be true to our emotions. Dr. Lucas is a neuropsychologist and psychotherapist. Prior to entering private practice, she was on the faculty at the Emory University School of Medicine. Dr. Lucas is the author of Rewire Your Brain for Love, Creating Vibrant Relationships Using the Science of Mindfulness. Welcome, Dr. Lucas. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Joan.
Marcia, in preparation of this interview, we did some pre-publicity for our conversation this morning, and I have to tell you, I received a lot of feedback from people. There are a number of people that wanted to take you to lunch today, pour out their hearts, and beg for your assistance. So hopefully, we're going to have some words of wisdom for people here today.
Well, I certainly hope so, yes.
The pressure's on now.
Yikes.
But relationships, love, these are topics that so many of us are wrestling with. We all want to have a fulfilling relationship. We all want to stop making the same old mistakes. Harriet Lerner talks about the dance of our relationships, and we do the same dance over and over again. So how is it that we can get our little pea brains circuited the way that we need to have these fulfilling relationships?
Give us more credit than having pea brains, but there are some parts of the brain that would seem to be, if not pea-sized, then almond-sized or almond-shaped. We'll talk about that in a minute, but that run the show way too much. You know what happens when we're talking about love as adults is we think that we can apply the nice, juicy, wrinkly part of our brains, the cortex that sits on top, the part that you see and maybe get grossed out by whenever you look at a picture of the brain. Mm-hmm. The reason it's all wrinkled is because you're trying to fit as much surface area and as much of that brilliant neocortex, the part that separates us supposedly from all other mammals and animals and makes us so insightful and aware and conscious. We're trying to use just that part to figure out how to make our relationships go better.
Now,
the
Marcia,
problem is, yes.
Well, I was going to just interrupt for a moment because I think before we go on, we need to get a basic understanding of how our brain works. And to quote from the movie Philadelphia, talk to me like I'm a 3-year-old.
Absolutely. So you've got the part on top that makes you smart and insightful, and you've got the part on the bottom that's really kind of not much more advanced than a lizard that is driven by fear, and from fear comes anger and anxiety and everything else that we struggle with. That's the stuff that drives drives the car, drives the truck, drives the boat, whatever means of transportation. You keep finding yourself on the same route over and over again when it comes to relationships. And we think, because of that nice wrinkly stuff on top, that higher levels, high thinking stuff on top, we think that we can just figure it out, read a self-help book, and then the next time, our partner says something snarky to us and we find ourselves about to react, we will go to our higher selves. We will remember to count to 10 before reacting. We'll remember that, you used to get yelled at by your dad when you were little, but this is not your dad and you're not little. And you know what? It doesn't work so well because when your partner says something snarky and you get anxious or afraid and those lower parts of your brain get activated, the top part basically goes out the window for most of us because our brains aren't as well integrated as we'd like them to be. That, in part, is because of whatever our experiences were with attachment and relationship before we were 18 months old. That's the part that really, kind of blows us all out of the water. If that all got laid down before I was 2, then what am I supposed to do about it now?
Is this what you're describing, the conscious versus the subconscious? Because when you're saying we read the self-help book and we're mindful about how we're going to act, but then we get that, we call it the knee-jerk reaction where, we just go back to our same old pattern. Is that the wiring of our subconscious mind?
I appreciate where you're going, and having been raised by a psychologist who was himself trained as a Freudian and myself as a psychologist, I don't necessarily find conscious and subconscious mind to be helpful. I find it really much more empowering to be talking about the brain and your nervous system and how those circuits tend to run and what gets activated, what gets turned off. And it is sort of like having probably the better way to do it rather than conscious and subconscious. The way that I find is helpful is to think about it in terms of what is explicit, what you have access to, and what your brain knows and you can think about and go, oh, that's why I'm afraid of cats. Right, I got bitten when I was 4, as opposed to some of the more implicit memories that happen when we're either very, very young or even throughout our lives when we're not paying attention in a particular way. And those implicit memories and pathways get activated, and we don't really know why we're responding the way we are. So you could sort of say that's like conscious mind and unconscious or subconscious mind. But it feels cleaner to me because I don't know where to put my finger on the subconscious, but I know where your amygdala is. And your amygdala and your hippocampus in your brain, which are in that down low part, have a lot to do with driving behaviors that you might think have to do with what's going on in the here and now, but are actually old either habits or old experiences that are directing you to do that sort of autopilot or knee-jerk reaction.
For a layperson, should we be looking at our brain similar to a computer, that almost like the programs were loaded prior to age 2?
It is sort of a computer, but it grows and evolves over time, not just in the software, but in the hardware.
Well, and that's the beauty that we're going to talk about neuroplasticity.
Exactly.
That's really exciting. And we'll get to that a little bit later on. But let's go back to, you mentioned attachments and that they're formed in our first years of life. Mm-hmm. Now, you talk about secure and insecure attachments.
Yes.
And how it drives how we interact with others. How are these attachments actually formed?
The nice thing about being human, as opposed to the reptiles that, I seem to keep slandering reptiles. It's not fair to them. But the nice thing about being human is that we actually come into the world as newborns, raring to go when it comes to attachment. And it's not just because we're these open-hearted, pure things. It's also a matter of survival. We are born much more helpless than reptiles, right? Reptile babies birth themselves out of their little eggs and off they go. We need a whole lot of help. We are totally dependent on our caregivers. So there has to be some kind of attachment and bond there, and it has to be reasonably safe and secure for us to survive. There's even a syndrome in newborns, if they are not held adequately and sort of really loved up on, touched, if they're fed and watered and all the, the biological basics, but not held and feeling like they are secure in the world with another person there for them, they have what's called failure to thrive. They don't gain weight, they don't develop, and a lot of times they die. So we really, really need those early attachments to survive, and caregivers and babies alike are wired for that. Now, we're not all necessarily wired to do it well. And let's say when you're, 3 months old, mom or dad got deployed to Iraq and, your other caregiver is at home, not only taking care of a newborn solo, which is hard enough, but doing it while worrying about their partner and their safety and, what's going to happen. So with all of that going on, there's understandably some anxiety, maybe responding to the baby in just the same way as before in terms of how frequently they're held and how they talk to them. But because the caregiver, the mom or dad that's left behind with the baby is anxious, that baby is going to be like a little radar detector for knowing that when I'm held, this doesn't feel really good. This feels kind of worrisome. Now, of course, babies aren't talking to themselves quite that way, but they detect it. And then they try to either modify their behavior to try to get their needs met, or they give up. And through repeated interactions, you end up learning. And as we learn, our brains create pathways so that we don't have to relearn everything all over again every time we open our eyes in the morning. You create those memories and those pathways, and that forms your attachment style. That attachment style pretty much is set, as I said, by 18 months and continues, barring any other, kind of major circumstances, throughout adulthood.
The wonderful thing about what you're saying is that no matter what attachment style we have set from the age of 2, new research now, as I mentioned, neuroplasticity, teaches us that we can change or rewire the brain circuitry. Years ago, they used to believe that when you got into adulthood, your brain was set and then it began to die off.
Exactly. It was nowhere but downhill.
Right. And that's what we've all been conditioned to believe. And that's why I'm so happy that you're here, because that's not the case, is it?
No, it's not. And it took a long time for that belief to die off. And I don't even mean in the general public. I mean amongst, the science of neurology. It's been pretty well accepted now for about 10 or 15 years that we have this capacity for neuroplasticity in humans throughout our lifespan. And that means that it's not all downhill. The good news is that whenever you are learning a new task, when you're focusing on something in a different way, when you're changing your patterns of thought, you're telling your brain, beef up the pathway that does this. Much like London taxi drivers, when they practice driving around and become experts at navigating the complicated streets of London, the part of their brain that is responsible for spatial navigation and spatial memory literally gets bigger. It gets denser with more connections, and there's an actual bulge in the brain. So there's a way that we all have this capacity. It depends on what you're practicing. If you continue to practice anxious attachment and worry, then that's where your brain devotes all of its sort of, highway funds, and you get a superhighway there. And a dirt road exists where it comes to being more calm and more grounded in relationships. We want to change that for people, and that's what you can do by practicing different ways of being in the world. And one of the most effective ways that, as a therapist, as a neuropsychologist, that I've found so far is the very simple practice, an easily accessible practice of mindfulness.
Marsha, I'm going to stop you there, because now that we know we can change it, and now that we know that a solution is mindfulness, we're going to let our listeners think about that while we take a break. And when we return, Marsha's going to tell us exactly how mindfulness stimulates the brain so that we can grow new integrated circuits. This is Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life now has a free monthly digital magazine that can be read online or emailed to your inbox. Each month, nationally recognized leaders in their field provide the information that you need to inspire and motivate you. We believe in a holistic approach to life, incorporating mind, body, and spirit. As philosopher Francis Bacon said, knowledge is power. Use the wisdom provided in the publication and apply it to your everyday life. Visit cyacyl.com for more information or to begin your free subscription. That's cyacyl.com. Welcome back to Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. I'm Joan Herman, and our guest today is Dr. Marsha Lucas, author of the book, Rewire Your Brain for Love, Creating Vibrant Relationships Using the Science of Mindfulness. Marsha, before break, we were talking about how we can rewire and change the circuitry of our brain, and you mentioned the practice of mindfulness. Exactly what is mindfulness, and how does it impact our brain function?
I think far and away the best and simplest way of describing mindfulness comes from Jon Kabat-Zinn, who was sort of a pioneer in bringing mindfulness in a way that was non-threatening to Western American culture, in that it is not religious, it's not aiming for spiritual enlightenment, you don't have to sit in a particular way, you don't have to shave your head and become a monk. It's really accessible, and really what it is a very highly refined form of attentional training. And what mindfulness is, paying attention in a particular way, and that is on purpose, in the present moment, non-judgmentally. And that's basically it. So the way that might look when you're formally practicing mindfulness, let's say, you sit down and you decide to practice it, you might decide the intention that you have is to focus, say, on something going on in your body, because that's always going on in the moment. And let's say you focus on your breath, which hopefully you always have with you, and it's always going on. And you can literally just focus your mind and pay attention to the sensation of the air going in through your nose, maybe hitting the back of your throat, your chest expanding, and then the breath subsiding. Sounds simple. It's not always easy, though, because we're really, really good at having busy, active, engaged brains.
Right.
And a lot of people think they can't practice mindfulness or that they can't meditate because their brains are too busy. And what I say to them is that actually that's going to serve you really well, because what happens when you're practicing mindfulness, your brain, of course, wanders. It's like a little puppy, it's going to wander off. And each time you notice that that puppy is wandering off, you bring it back. So your mind goes to whether or not you took the chicken out of the freezer for dinner tonight while you're sitting and meditating, which happens to me a lot, and you notice it and you bring it back. And it seems to be from the studies in the neuroscience labs, all across the world now, and in places like Harvard and MIT, UCLA, that it's the practice of noticing and returning that builds up the kinds of pathways that help in terms of well-being overall, and in certain areas that seem to beef you up for better relationships. So again, I talked about whatever the brain practices the most is what the brain dedicates more real estate to, more resources to.
Do you need to be giving yourself suggestive thoughts during this? Like, do you need to tell yourself, okay, so it's just quieting the mind? It's
really, I want to say it is not actually quieting the mind, because that's what throws a lot of people off. Like, I can't quiet this monkey in my head,
Okay.
And what you're doing is you're noticing the noise. You're just becoming aware of the noise. And that seems to be the key, because let's go back to that moment we were describing before where your partner makes a snarky comment, right? If you've been practicing mindfulness, what you've done is you've gotten used to being able to tune into what's going on in your mind and in your body on the fly, in the moment, without even really thinking about it really closely. It's become a new habit, like those London taxi drivers. And what happens then is, because you notice, you become aware at a level of, your gut has gripped and your jaw has set, and that you're feeling, inflamed and angry, right? Mm-hmm. You have that extra bit of time as your new pathways are noticing that and kicking it on up into your awareness to go, okay, I have a choice here. I could react in that old knee-jerk way, or I can calm myself really simply, because I've practiced it, and respond in a way that is more relationship enhancing, so that instead of being captive to your brain's response to defend yourself or to be afraid or to cry or to run away, you're actually able to hold on to yourself without having to really think about it. It's more of a reflex. It's the new autopilot for you, and you bring your best self forward. And that's really what's relationship enhancing about creating those new circuits.
Now, Marcia, you spoke before about the fact that these circuits are created before the age of 2. For parents that have infants or young children, or even children over the age of 2, is there something...
And they're worrying whether they're getting it right?
Well, yeah. Is there something we can do to create the I don't want to say right, but more beneficial circuits, so that when our children are older, they don't have to do this? Can we get it right?
Exactly. And you know what? We all get it wrong. I joke in the book about, how my husband and I are taking notes. I have a 9-year-old right now. We're taking notes as we go along in all the ways that we've messed up.
Yeah, so I've messed my boys up.
We hand him a notebook when he goes off to college or his first therapist or whatever it is, and he'll get a real head start, because we know, oh man, I blew that one. But what I'll say is the best thing to do is you yourself to practice mindfulness. Mm-hmm. Because 2 things. Number 1, you're going to be less reactive, right? Your kid, pulls a dead frog out of his pocket. You're not going to freak out as much. You'll still say, that goes outside, or whatever you need to do. But you're not going to have that sort of reaction. Mm-hmm. You get to hold on to yourself. It's also easier for you to remember who you are and who your kid is, and not to be confusing the two. So if you're tired and cranky and you've come home from work and you've gotten yelled at by your boss, and your kid does something relatively minor that's wrong, you're not as likely to have that knee-jerk reaction of irritation and, landing all over them. You're more likely to hold on to yourself and be able to be what we're aiming for, both in the parent-child relationship and then also parent to yourself or grown-up to yourself, which is attunement. That you're able to get that same sort of thing that I was describing before, where you're aware of what's going on in your body, you've got a handle on what's going on in your mind, and then you have the ability to respond differently. You have better body regulation, better fear modulation, your emotional resilience has improved, your response flexibility increases, you have better insight and self-knowing, like what's my stuff, You have increased and more balanced, healthy capacity for empathy for yourself and for the other person at the same time. And you've got a perspective shift. Not only is not, this moment is not the be-all and end-all, but I'm not the be-all and end-all. We're all in this together. All of those things are benefits that you get from having a parent when you're very young who is attuned, able to kind of get a sense of what's going on inside their kid, and then respond in a way that's contingent, respond in a way that has something to do with what's going on in your child. The more mindful you are through practice, the more your child's going to get the best of you and is going to get that attuned and contingent response, then their brain wires to be able to do it for themselves and with others as well. That's really if I were to claim to be a subversive, I would say that's what I'm trying to do, is to get as many people as possible, whether when they're adults or with their kids, to be able to have these, what I call the 7 benefits that we get either through having that healthy attachment when we're a kid, or through the practice of mindfulness, we change our brains in ways that then function and look so much more like the people who did have that healthy, successful attachment.
Well, Marcia, I hate to say this, but we are just about out of time. This interview really flew by. I mean, there is so much I want to talk to you about, so you are going to have to come back.
I would be delighted.
Marcia's new book is Rewire Your Brain for Love, Creating Vibrant Relationships Using the Science of Mindfulness. If you'd like more information about Marcia, you can visit her website, rewireyourbrainforlove.com, or marshalucasphd.com, or as always, you can visit our website, cyacyl.com. That stands for Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. While on our site, listen to past shows as podcasts, read the digital magazine, sign up for our mailing list, and be sure to follow the show on Facebook and Twitter. Marcia, again, I have loved chatting with you today. We really need help with our relationship, so I'm really glad that you were here, and you have an open invitation. You are definitely coming back.
It's a genuine pleasure, Joan, and I'll be happy to come back.
This is Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. I'm Joan Herman. Thanks for tuning in.